In this video, we're going to talk about truss web and chord restraint bracing. What is it? When do you need to install it? My name's Chad Johnson. I'm with Truss Components of Washington. I've been in the truss industry for over 35 years. Let's get started. Truss web restraint bracing is often referred to as continuous lateral bracing or rat runs. And what it is, when we have a series of trusses that have webs that line up, so one there, another one behind it, another one behind it, we end up with a series of webs, and they will get oftentimes a brace across those webs to help them avoid buckling. So the restraint bracing transfers loads from the webs into the brace, and then from the brace it'll be transferred down into the ceiling, up into the roof, eventually out to the walls, and that's basically what it is. If you think about the way loads work in trusses, we have forces that are pushing towards the center, which put a compression load on a web. We have forces that are pulling toward the outside. Those put a tension load on the web. Just like a chain, if we pull on it, it's going to want to stay straight. But if we push on it, it's going to want to buckle. And so what this restraint bracing does is it prevents these webs from buckling under those compression forces. So let's take a look at different kinds of restraint bracing and how we'll know when to install them. So like I mentioned just a moment ago, if we have a run of webs that are all in line, we can have a continuous restraint brace that will prevent the webs from buckling. That the forces in those webs being transferred into that brace will eventually need to be transferred through diagonal bracing up to the roof, down to the ceiling, because otherwise all of those webs will just act in unison and they'll just all buckle together. So we need to tie them off. So one type of bracing is that continuous lateral restraint. Looking at a cross section, it would look like this, with your web being here, and that restraint brace would be attached to the web with some nails. Now, I'm not getting real specific here about what kind of bracing is, or how much bracing is required, what size, that sort of thing. Your truss manufacturer will provide you with information describing exactly what size the bracing needs to be, how often it needs to be restrained back to the roof or the ceiling. That depends on the forces that are in the truss. So this is just kind of high level, but a lot of times this might be a 2x4 that's being attached to the side of a web. Different types of lumber might be called out. But that's what we refer to as a continuous lateral restraint. These members that reinforce that restraint are the bracing. And this is the simplest to install and the most common when you have a run of webs that are all in line. Well, what happens if we are, let's say, in a hip set and each truss is different, and so that means that the webs don't line up from truss to truss? What are we going to do in that case? Well, when we have that, there are a couple of other types of bracing that we can use. There is T bracing and I bracing, T bracing and L bracing. And the way those get their name is if we were to look at a section cut of the web, a T brace is installed with a narrow edge of the brace. The wide edge of the brace is installed to the narrow edge of the web, and it makes a section like a T. If we have an L brace, this would be the web here, and our brace member is installed like so, and that makes a section that looks like an L, so we call it an L brace. In both of these cases, the idea is that we stiffen up that member, so that brace, for instance, would be about 80% of the length of the original member, and it prevents that member from buckling out of plane. If you think about this web by itself with forces imposed on the end of it, it's thin and by itself could be buckled out of plane, but when we put that brace member on it, now it's much stiffer because it has this section in the other direction. So this is a T-brace, that's an L-brace. These are typically used in situations where members don't align from one truss to the next. Additionally, well, let's take a step back for a second. How do we know when we need to install these braces? Well, usually they are designated on the truss specifications as a box on that web. So we'll go simply back to our favorite Fink style truss here. So if we see a truss drawing that looks like this, then it's likely that we don't need any web restraint bracing. However, if we see a box on the side of the web that looks like a cut through the end of a 2x4 or some other size lumber, that is indicating that we need a brace, a restraint on that member. And so what we want to do is we want to look for, on our truss design drawings, where do we see those little boxes? And so each truss is different in the forces that it carries, the design, and the lengths of the members, the forces that are in each of those members. And so you could have a couple of trusses that look essentially the same, but being used in different instances. Maybe one has an interior bearing under one of those panel points, which is putting extra force, extra compression force in that member. This one over here does not have that bearing. So even though the truss looks symmetrical, it might need that restraint brace where a similar looking web doesn't. Or maybe that same truss is used in an instance where it doesn't have that extra bearing and it doesn't need a restraint brace. So we have to look at each truss individually on the project. Now, in addition to web restraint bracing, we may also need restraint bracing on the top or bottom chord. If we're not using a ceiling to brace the bottom chord of our trusses, then we may see that continuous lateral restraints are required on the bottom chord. Your drawing will specify what the spacing on those would be. A lot of times if we have a flat top chord on a truss, that will require that we put restraint bracing on that flat top chord. This is pretty common in a hip situation or a piggyback brace truss. So piggyback base truss. Either way, we would need that restraint bracing to keep those members from buckling. So from a very high level, what continuous restraint bracing is it's a member that is added to the roof trusses. It's typically not supplied by your truss manufacturer, but it's specified where it goes. And its purpose is to prevent out-of-plane buckling of web members or chord members under the loads that are imposed on the trusses. So I hope this has been helpful. A high-level view. Any further questions should be directed to your truss manufacturer and referred specifically to the engineering for your project. But I hope that helps. I've enjoyed sharing this with you today, and we'll see you on the next video.